So my name's Matt Hunter. I work for Downer as their National Environment and Sustainability Manager, and also a member of the ISCA working group in WA, and lucky enough to, I guess as part of my role, get to see a number of ISCA projects through Downer's work with Ararat Wind Farm, HCMT. I'm up at Newcastle Light Rail tomorrow. So it's good to be able to get around and see what's happening. Firstly, thanks to Adam, to Hayley and the working group for pulling this panel together. Waste-derived material is obviously a pretty topical issue in WA with some of the changes with the Eclipse case and other things that have happened in recent times. So it's fantastic to get a group of panellists here that are representing the DER, representing the Waste Corp, representing Main Roads to really have that open discussion around waste management and what we can do in Western Australia. So as far as panellists this today, slight change from what you've got in your initial guide. So Louise Orshot. Yeah, that's right. So Louise couldn't make it, so we had a late change, and luckily Bernard Ryan's managed to come on behalf of Main Road. So thanks very much for coming along at short notice and being here to represent. To represent DER. My bad. We've also got Jeremy Hogburn from the Contaminated Sites Auditor. We have Les Marchant from Main Roads. And we have Marcus Geisler, who's the chairman of the Waste Authority. So to kick off, what I'll do is just pass you guys the mic, introduce yourselves from there. Les is going to give us a quick 5 or 10 minute presentation on Main Roads and some of the great work they've been doing, and then we're going to go into the panel discussion. So I'll hand you over, starting with Les.
Great, thanks Matt. So I'm Les Marchant. I'm manager of our materials engineering branch at Main Roads. My responsibilities are to maintain our pavement design guidelines and construction specifications in relation to materials, and also I have a role in, determining our long-term strategic materials needs in Main Roads and trying to forecast what our future is. I'll pass on to Jeremy.
Thanks. Jeremy Hogburn. I work for an environmental consulting company called Senversa. I'm a contaminated land consultant and spend quite a lot of my time as a contaminated sites auditor, which is basically an outsourced regulatory role under the Contaminated Sites Act. I also think I have the dubious honour of being the only auditor to have audited a project under the Waste-Derived Materials Guidelines. I think they existed for about 4 months or something like that, and I issued my audit report a few days before I think they were officially withdrawn. So I may be wrong, someone else might have audited a waste-derived materials project, but I think I'm the only one. I've also, it's interesting that Adam talked about Rouse Head. I was also the auditor for Rouse Head, which involved dredging a lot of material out of Fremantle Port and placing it out there, and when I got involved in that project it was in a fairly messy state in terms of contaminated sites and how to manage the characterisation of that dredged material, and I wonder whether that project would have been undertaken now following the Eclipse decision. So that's some of my background.
Thanks. My name is Marcus Geisler. I'm the chairman of the Waste Authority. So the Waste Authority is a group of 5 members. We're appointed by the governor, and we give advice to the state government on guiding Western Australia to a low-waste society. So we give advice to the minister. We get support actually from the DER, admin support. We also manage the WAR account. We were established under the WAR Act, which is the Waste Avoidance and Resource Recovery Act, which is a great name. War on Waste. I think it's on tonight on ABC. But we also manage the funds that come out of the WAR Act. And 25% of the levy that is raised per annum actually comes to the Waste Authority, which is about $20 million a year. We try to invest that money into knowledge and infrastructure and back into the industry to actually avoid waste, but if we can't avoid it, then actually make sure we reuse the resources. So I'm glad to be here. And I think we should mention actually, Adam, at the port, Fremantle Port, you got an Infinity Award, one of the state's awards, which we manage as well, for reusing construction and demolition waste in your port, isn't it? Perfect. No, I just want to recognise that you're leading by example, and thanks for having us here. Yeah. Cheers.
Marcus. My name's not Louise, Bernard Ryan from the Department of Environment and Regulation. I'm here standing in for Louise, obviously. She's not able to make it today. I work in the waste policy area within the department. So the department has three key areas, I suppose. One is policy, one's licensing and one's compliance. So the policy area, although it sounds like it's not involved in regulation, does actually get involved in regulatory policy. However, I spend most of my time working for Marcus and for the Waste Authority in providing policy support to the work that's undertaken in terms of the programs that the Waste Authority runs for diverting waste from landfill. But I am here to provide some departmental responses as much as I can. So you can ask me questions, whether I can answer them or not. We'll wait and see.
Look, thanks very much for inviting me along here today. The topic is the challenge of using recycled and upcycled waste-derived materials. I just want to take a couple of minutes to step back and just have a look at, I guess, sustainability challenges, because they dictate what some of the challenges are down in our recycling levels. So most of you will immediately recognise that as the international symbol for recycling, and there's some really exciting advances happening in the recycling game at the moment, and a lot of interest, which is really fantastic to see. But I hope most of you will actually recognise that as the international symbol for sustainability and not recycling. Recycling is only one of the steps of sustainability, and it's actually the third tier in the hierarchy. We need to remember that the first thing we should be doing is reducing energy and our use of raw resources. The second tier is reusing, so wherever possible we should be pre-designing our materials and work so that they can be reused or restored or repaired. And recycling is the third tier of that, so if we can't reduce the waste, if we can't reuse it, then we recycle. It is really important that we try and upcycle materials and use their embedded energy as best as possible. So there's a big move in Europe towards upcycling rather than downcycling. So downcycling is our last resort before just burying it in landfill. So what are some of the challenges to sustainability in general? Look, some really high-level ones here. I think we live in a country where there's poor, broad knowledge of sustainability principles. So it's a select group of us that actually understand the principles of sustainability, and it's not a broad concept amongst the community or in the press or in other areas. We live in a country where there's not strong political support for sustainability principles, and I think you have a look at what politics did to the South Australian blackouts and how engineering and logic was twisted around to be something that it just definitely isn't, is an example of our political leadership in sustainability. And I guess the third area is a low level of community engagement in understanding what recycling is. There's a reluctance for people to put recycled materials into the recycled bins. There's too much recyclable materials that are going into general waste. So what is our challenge in this? Well, our challenge needs to be that the strategies that each of us develop in our various departments and collectively, we need to make sure that we avoid accepting that those base challenges to sustainability are unchangeable. I think we can change that. Some of those are pretty big for us to change, but I think they can be changed. We need to make sure that we avoid setting ourselves low aspirational targets. We need to make sure that we don't adopt sustainability initiatives that might look sustainable but in fact aren't real sustainability initiatives when you drill down into the detail. And I think that's where this ISCA e-tool is going to be an excellent development area. My biggest concern is that we make decisions now investing in the wrong technologies and wrong processes which preclude us from doing better in the future. So we need to make sure that we're looking long term. In the road space, in main roads in particular, there's some really exciting things happening, some big drives to reduce our environmental footprint, big drives to adopt optimal design lives, reduce pavement thicknesses, reduce the use of materials, and then ensure good quality construction for long durability infrastructure. There's a lot of projects on at the moment. We've got some new EME2 high modulus asphalt pavement thicknesses or pavement designs which are going to reduce our asphalt thicknesses by 20%. We've got some interesting projects on increasing the use of reclaimed asphalt pavements, asphalt planings, so RAP. So we'll be increasing our current 10% to much higher levels, working with industry. We've got other works with the Tyre Stewardship Australia to start increasing the use of rubber. We use quite a bit of rubber in bitumen, but we want to increase the use of rubber. And I guess there's a number of other initiatives, none of which I really see as big challenges, because all those initiatives should save us money and that will get the political drive behind us to implement. So, look, I won't go through detail. I think we'll try and keep the time to have an open discussion, so I won't go through the detail of what Main Roads is doing at the moment. But I want to focus on, I guess, 3 areas which I think are a little bit contentious at the moment, and they're areas where we do have some challenges. The first is recycled plastics. We've just completed a study in a variety of, I guess, future technologies. So one of them was looking at solar roads, another was looking at nanotechnology, and the third aspect was looking at the use of plastics. So acquiring plastics from our waste stream here and using them as additives into bitumen. Now, this is a classic case of upcycling, where we can actually improve the quality and durability of bitumen by using these plastics that are recovered. However, our conclusion from the project is that although only 25% of plastic is recovered from the waste stream at the moment, almost all of it is used in high value markets. So it's going back into textile industries and various other industries for use as plastics. So we've concluded that to divert that plastic away to bitumen is actually a lower end usage than what it's currently going to. So at this stage, Main Roads is not progressing with plastics in bitumen. However, if we get to a point where that 25% recovery increases to closer to 100% recovery and there is spare plastic that isn't looking for a home, we are definitely interested. Another area is the recycled C&D waste. Look, I'm not going to dwell on this topic. I think this has been discussed quite extensively over the last couple of years. Our position hasn't changed. There are 2 main risks. There's a risk of asbestos, there's a risk of cracking. Both of those risks can be managed, and Main Roads does facilitate the use of crushed recycled concrete on its alliance projects, where we can put in extra processes to manage those risks. And I guess we've also provided advice that it's a suitable material, it's a particularly suitable material under full depth asphalt pavements as a sub-base, and it's also a suitable material as a base course on lower traffic roads. There are published IPWEA specifications used by LGAs, so local government authorities, for that purpose. I guess there's continuing pressure for Main Roads to include it in its specifications, which are generally for higher traffic roads where we would require more onerous, processes in place. So our position hasn't changed considerably from what it has been to date. The third material I just wanted to touch on was glass, and some of you will be aware of the recycled glass trial done up on Wanneroo Road, where 15% glass was blended with limestone. And I guess, there's some mixed views on that, and certainly our Main Roads position is really that glass should be reused, or if not reused, recycled as glass. So glass is an ideal material for reuse. It can be reused over and over again. If you go to most other countries in the world, or many other countries in the world at least, certainly all of Europe, glass reusing is very prominent. In Germany, and Marcus's origin country is probably even more advanced than Germany, but all glass is almost all reused. It's automated sorting, and beer bottles go back to breweries to be refilled, and beer bottles get used hundreds of times. The same thing happens in less advanced countries like Peru and many South American countries. It's all done manually there, but again, beer bottles go back to be refilled. What do we do here in Australia? We're somewhere in the middle where we don't reuse. Victoria has a beneficiation plant where it recycles glass into cullet, which can be used to produce new glass at much reduced energy levels than creating glass from silica sand. So what's our Main Roads position? As I said, glass should be reused or recycled as glass. We certainly discourage the downcycling of a high energy material like glass into a low energy raw material, particularly one that's abundant like sand. And I guess one of the things we look at is embedded energy. And if we look at, most of our roads are granular pavements with an aggregate bitumen seal. Typically the embedded energy in that is around 30-40 megajoules per tonne of material. In comparison, when we have to go to our heavy duty roads, asphalt is 800 megajoules per tonne, concrete pavements 1200 megajoules per tonne, and in comparison to those, when we look at glass, we're another order of magnitude higher. So the typical embedded energy in glass is 15,000 megajoules per tonne. Converting that high energy material into a sand and then transporting it and then blending it with other materials adds even more energy to that material. So we're now in excess of 15,000, and you compare that, I guess, manufactured glass to a natural sand, which we can get very, very handily and abundantly close to where we're building. That's 5 megajoules per tonne. So, you know, I guess on this basis, we have concerns about whether recycling glass sand is actually a viable long-term sustainability move. In comparison, if we were converting that waste glass into a glass cullet to be used to manufacture new glass, the energy required to convert that cullet to new glass is 4,000 megajoules per tonne in comparison to 15,000. So there's a huge saving. There's an 8,000 or 9,000 megajoule per tonne saving if we ship that glass cullet across to Victoria to process into new glass, or if we started to invest in a beneficiation plant here. What I'll do is I'll leave that there, and we'll go back to a panel discussion. And I'd like to leave you with the big challenge, and that's we need to collaborate and develop long-term strategies which enable greater reusing and greater upcycling of waste-derived materials. And I'm very interested in finding a better upcycling use for glass. So with that, I'll pass back to Matt.
Thanks very much, Les. So look, we won't do any questions yet. Instead, we'll go to the panel discussion. If you do have questions for Les, then hold off. I'm only going to ask a few questions. We'll have the panel bounce amongst themselves a fair bit, and we'll also make sure we get time for plenty of questions, because talking to people during the day, I'm sure there are quite a few. Just to kick off then, there's been a few mentions already of the Eclipse decision, so I'm not too sure if everybody is aware of that or not. So Jeremy, can I just ask you just to give us a brief couple of minute update on what happened with Eclipse, and then also I'll get you to pass it over to Bernard. And Bernard, if we can get a bit of an update from a government side of things about how you're going to address that and what's happening moving forward.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'll have a crack at this. There's probably people in the room that are better versed in the decision than I am, so feel free to jump in if I've got anything factually incorrect or understood any legal nuances. But look, the decision was a case around accepting material at a landfill and whether or not the landfill levy applied. So it was quite a specific case where Eclipse was receiving material that they didn't consider attracted the landfill levy, and the West Australian government considered that it did. And Justice Beach's decision was that the landfill levy did apply, and that really turned on his definition of waste, because that's what the issue really was about. And I mean, I've read the decision, and it's some pretty complicated reasoning, and you need to really give it a bit of thought to see where he was going with the definition of waste. And there was some reasonably, I guess, complex considerations about definitions and so forth. It's a bit of fun, if you like, that sort of thing. But the upshot of it is that he determined that waste is defined as something that's not wanted at the source rather than at the receiver. So Eclipse was essentially arguing that they were using the material as a resource, if you like, rather than receiving it as waste. And because they were using it as a resource, it wasn't waste. And Justice Beach determined that because it was waste, because it was surplus to the needs of whoever it was that was disposing of it, it was waste, and therefore they were receiving waste. Hop in after I've had my say if any aspect of that's inaccurate. What that means, the upshot of I mean, to be fair, he did make an observation that he appreciated that probably had some consequences that were unintended, which is absolutely the case. And he said that wasn't his problem, that was up to the regulators to sort out, which is fantastic, and now we're all trying to sort that out. The unintended consequences are that any material that is surplus to the requirements at its source is now considered a waste, and anybody receiving waste at more than 500 tonnes per annum requires a licence under the Environmental Protection Act, and the material is potentially subject to the landfill levy. So that, I think, is the main implications for infrastructure projects and development projects, and I guess sustainability, in that, you know, there's lots of material that's surplus at source that somebody else can use. And it seems to me, I'm a simple sort of fellow, that it makes a lot of sense for that material to be reused rather than being diverted to landfill. So I'll just, I guess I'll pass the microphone on, and if anybody wants to sort of add anything to that or correct anything that I've said that wasn't quite right, then please feel free.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I won't attempt to correct you. All I suppose I can say is that there's been a recognition in considering the decision of Justice Beach about the intended applications of the regulations and the potential applications subsequent to that decision, that they're not consistent with the original intent of applying a levy to what you would call traditional landfilling activities. And the department is currently intending to amend those regulations to make it clear that the original intent of the landfill levy is the intent that is intended to apply, so that it would be, that would involve effectively redefining clean fill in the regulations and in the documentation that deals with the acceptance of waste, and also coming up with a definition of uncontaminated fill, which could also be, again, not subject to the levy in those circumstances. So that, to some extent, deals with, if that's approved by the government, obviously the government's got a few things on at the moment, and there are some drafting priorities, but the department's pushing ahead with that as quickly as possible, and would be looking to consult with the industry more broadly, some of the major representative organisations, about the intended changes and whether they address some of those issues that are a problem. Hopefully in the second, or if worst comes to worst, the third quarter of this year, this calendar year. So that work has been reasonably well progressed to this point. It's not finally approved by government, so that needs to be considered. And as it's a regulation change, that can be done relatively quickly as opposed to changes to acts. So I suppose that's probably all I could say about the legal side of that.
Really good. I'm sure it'll be a relief to a lot of people that something is happening there. Is there anything in place as an interim, or at the moment is it?
No, the department's position is that it is regulating waste as it was prior to the decision. until such time as there's a regulatory change. Or assuming there is a regulatory change, then there'll be a different approach. But
So it's as per prior to the decision?
Yep. And the end of waste framework that was established previously is on hold, and it's still on hold.
Okay, thank you. Marcus, question for yourself. So,
Can I just add a little
yeah,
bit?
go.
I think this whole position of the judge there is that it highlights the issue we have. Because at some stage, even if it is a waste, and let's not have the discussion whether virgin material from a site is a waste or not, because I think that will be fixed, because it's just crazy if it's not contaminated. And the main thing is that if something meets a specification that is acceptable for the end user, it should not be called a waste anymore. So there has to be a point in the life of waste that it's the end of waste, because it meets a certain spec, it has gone through a certain process. And obviously, virgin material, virgin sand from a construction site will meet that specification. So it is important that we get over that thinking of, this is a waste now. Once it meets a spec, it's a secondary raw material. And I think that mindset, that's what we have to overcome in Australia. And I think, Les, you were spot on with what you said, that we're not mature enough in Australia to accept that, because it's awareness and acceptance of that fact that a waste can be a raw material.
I might just add to that. Look, I think that's absolutely spot on, and I was sort of thinking about it earlier in the sessions today, that probably in terms of this material like this, we should just avoid using the word waste. It's about suitability, and actually, from my perspective as a contaminated sites auditor, I'm auditing a site and whether it's suitable for its proposed use and whether it otherwise represents a risk of harm to the environment or environmental value. And that can actually extend beyond virgin uncontaminated material to any sort of material that might be fit for purpose. So the waste-derived materials assessment and some of the other considerations that I have when I'm looking at sites aren't really about whether something's got concentrations of one thing or another above background. It's simply about risk and about suitability for use. So I think the comment that you made there can actually be extended to suitability. If it's suitable for its end use, then good, let's use it, particularly if it's a sustainable outcome.
Thank you. So, Marcus, another question for you. So, coming from Holland especially, can you give me some examples of what you learn and some of the differences of industry, I guess, in Holland compared to where we are at the moment in WA in particular?
Yeah, so just to paint a picture, we as West Australians, we generate about 6 million tonnes of waste per annum, and 50% of that is from the construction and demolition sector. And that's actually very easy to recycle into a secondary raw material for road base or other use. So 50%, but of that 50%, we currently, and for the last couple of years, consistently, we've been diverting about 35 or 40%. So we're recycling about 1.2 million tonnes of the 3 million tonnes that are generated. So it's great, we're doing some good work, we just have to step it up. And just in that context, is actually a commitment from the government to achieve diversion targets. There's a waste strategy, it's on our website, the Waste Authority, and it actually has targets in there from the government to divert by 2020 70% of construction and demolition waste out of landfill. So it should be used. I mean, it's crazy that we dig holes to later fill up with material, and we should have used that material in the first place to actually use it as a raw material so we can avoid digging these holes. So one of the fundamentals of and this is exactly the same what happened in Holland, we call it the lot of unlansing, which was an academic who came up with the hierarchy of waste. And the highest objective, obviously, is avoidance in the first place. We should not generate any waste. And after that, we can do the reuse, recycle, and recover of the energy. And the last step, absolute last step, is actually landfilling. And just on avoidance of waste, looking at the construction and demolition sector, actually at the building sector, 2 years ago, an average of 30 tonnes of waste was generated building one house. 30 tonnes. And this is a combination of sand and rubble and brick straps and plastic and timber. Because the levy was introduced and companies like Eclipse are being stopped by trying to not pay the levy, the cost of landfilling has gone up. And actually now the construction companies, the builder, is looking at generating less waste because it's expensive to get rid of. And now we have developments that actually achieve 70% diversion of that 30 tons per house that's being built. So that's great progress, and big companies have taken on the challenge. And I don't know what you've seen, the master builders actually came out with this smart waste guide, and that's one of the programs we supported financially to actually make happen. So we've got three stakeholders, I think, in this. This is the end user of the product. This is the community, and really the community has to create this expectation that materials reused and not being landfilled. And then we have the processors of the material. And I think the government is on side. Government has targets in their strategy, regulators working on regulation, that's good. So what we're trying to do now is actually changing the acceptance and awareness of the end user, because we're not there yet. We're using 1 million tons per annum, but we have to step up that awareness. And I'll talk about a program we've implemented here in a minute. But the third area, which is I think the most important area, is the industry, the actually processing industry. These crushers that are going to deliver this material that meets consistently a certain spec, they have to create trust in the market. Because if we get burned once with a big project, it's going to be difficult to recover. So in Holland, what happened first is that the industry sat together with government, and the industry actually, they formed a body called the Crushing Association of Holland. And there's a levy, internal levy, that was collected from every ton sold through that organization, which were multiple crushing companies. And that was actually put into a fund, and from that fund, the testing was paid for of all these members. So what quickly happened is the cowboys were pushed out of the market, because there's always people that want to, deliver a cheaper product. And in some cases, cheap is not, is bad, because obviously corners are cut, and testing costs money. So first in Holland we formed, and I was actually part of that, we formed this industry association, and we were very organized as an industry. And I think that's what needs to happen in Western Australia. Government is on site, they've got targets, there's funding programs, and then the next thing is obviously engineers like yourself. You have to actually trust that there's a spec in place and start using it and actually putting it in your jobs. Because if that doesn't happen, it'll never be used. So you have to create this pooled market. So what we've done here in Western Australia is we've come up with, and the minute the previous minister approved it, we've come up with a $10 million program, and it's called the Recycled Construction Product Program, RCPP. And that means that local governments and the private sector have access to funding. So there's $8 million for local governments over the next 3 years and $2 million for the private sector. And we did first, is anybody aware of that program, that it's available? Local government, obviously, they want to grab this. And so there's money allocated to each local government based on population. That's the $8 million, but $2 million going through open rounds. And we did the first round about 5 months ago, and we got 4 submissions that actually tried to get it. What it means is we subsidize the material $4 per ton. $4 per ton. So that makes it now cheaper than limestone. We're just trying to create this pool from the market to use the material.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Okay. Look, I've got a fair few questions here, but I am mindful of time, so I'll just open it up for anyone. If you've got any questions, put your hand up, and we'll take those as well, rather than just me ask the questions of a piece of paper.
So I work on a project that has a contractual obligation to get an excellent ISCA rating. We are also going to be generating 2 million tonnes of spoil, which is a natural resource. Since the Eclipse case and the WDM suspension, we've been advised by the DER that anything over 500 tonnes, whoever accepts that has to be licensed and has to pay the levy. So we've got developers, we've got everybody asking for this material and no mechanism by which we can prove that it is clean fill and reuse it. So the current scenario is we've got mountains of spoil building up on site and what is a very significant public infrastructure project at risk of coming to a stop within weeks, because the risk for both the end user and ourselves with the uncertainty is nobody can give us an answer. So I guess my question is, and you might not be able to answer, but I understand that the DR are working on new guidelines and new frameworks and classification, or the definition of clean fill and all of this, but you've got major projects now that are at risk. So what can we do now? So what is the immediate option for projects or for industry to actually keep going? Because the social implications, the cost of sending material to landfill is just not viable for anyone.
I think this is one of those questions I referred to earlier. Ones that I probably wouldn't be able to answer. Yeah, look, the department's position is the one that you've been told. Nothing's going to change and nothing I say will make any difference to that. It'd just be wrong. The only thing that occurs to me is the extent to which those materials could be identified as having a legitimate purpose, meeting a particular standard, in which case their transport and removal off-site wouldn't, in my understanding of the regime, trigger that requirement. So, and I think Marcus has talked about standards before. There's a lot more work that needs to be done with respect to standards, and even with, commonly used materials like recycled concrete, there are still a range of issues with that pH and metals and a range of other things, which there isn't, from my understanding of the department's review of that, there isn't good information available about the behaviour of those materials in situ. And in that sort of environment, a regulator is going to be required to take a pretty conservative approach. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think the Waste Authority has also acknowledged that in the past and funded some of the work that was done as part of the End of Waste framework. That was just a beginning. So irrespective of the department and the levy, there's a whole big issue around standards that needs to be explored. None of that's going to help you in the next couple of weeks, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry.
It sounds like a tragedy to me, because here we're talking about landfill diversion, and this is in the state waste strategy. And assuming that your material is clean, because it's under the definition waste, it has to go into a landfill and will never be recovered. I mean, it's just tears are close to my eyes here. So I think there's always the DG of the, there's a new DG, let's say the DGDR. I mean, they can give exemptions, and I'm not saying you're going to get one, but it just doesn't sound right, and especially because it's recognised that it's unintentionally captured under the ruling of the judge. I mean, the last thing that should happen that this material ends up in landfill and not being reused, but it has to be clean. So have you done testing, and do you have and it's all good? So. Yeah, you see, and now we've got 6 million tonnes. Half of it is construction demolition waste, and I'm sure if you're going to get out of your project, there's going to be millions and millions of tonnes coming out. So that'll look pretty good. It's good for the levy, good income.
Probably just make the same, extend the observation that I made before. I think that it can be extended. I think that there's a room for a standard that users can use as a rule of thumb, as a tier 1 guide as to whether their material is suitable for reuse or not. And then I think there's value in having an escape clause that says you can also undertake a site-specific or a project-specific risk assessment that can be approved, say, through a contaminated sites auditor, or the DER, where major projects with you know, a million cubes is a lot. It's worth spending a bit of money doing a site-specific risk assessment to see whether that can go somewhere other than landfill. It seems very sensible to me.
With Main Roads projects, we do a lot of cut-to-fill operations, so within a project, and it would be absolutely totally ridiculous to say that the material that we transfer from a cut is now waste going on to the same projects. So I'm just wondering, with your large government infrastructure project, whether you can't collaborate with a project that happens to need some fill, and if the two projects are now one, it is now not an unwanted material at the source.
So all this is making me very excited. In New South Wales, we've got a huge problem approaching. So you probably can't see this, but this is a slide between 2017 and 2025. We've got an unprecedented requirement for materials that are currently going to landfill, and we're talking about here. And we're working with the New South Wales EPA in a group called the Responsible Construction Leadership Forum, which John Holland and all the major tier ones are part of. And in New South Wales, we're trying to set up a materials exchange database. And so wouldn't it be good if ISCA, as Anthony, could facilitate that kind of materials exchange database across Australia? So that's a question. How about ISCA lead the development of a materials exchange database to actually provide the materials that we need for these upcoming peaks in infrastructure development? So in the absence of...
Yeah, great suggestion, and definitely something we can take on board. And we're doing a lot of work in the supplier space around really trying to hook up some of the supply chains within the green supply chains or the sustainable supply chains, and taking away some of those barriers to playing with each other nicely in the market, and more importantly, increasing the productivity and efficiency of those sort of chains so that we can try and cut the red tape and just make things as efficient, as productive as possible. So definitely take that on board, and if anyone's got any practical ideas, we'll have drinks at the end of the day, so I'm sure we'll resolve all the world's problems then. Please, yep.
Yeah, so going back to the earlier question, so in Holland we actually did the same, and we called it the soil bank. And there was a group that actually took that on, and it was the Association of Crushers. Because to recycle bricks and sand from crushers, we have the same issue. Because the feedstock comes in very consistently. You know, it comes in at 1,000 tons an hour or 1,000 tons a day. The problem with projects, they are going peaks. And then, for example, Gateway, you guys talk about 4 million tons of material. They have to come in not overnight, but hundreds of trucks carting stuff in. So the processors cannot work with these high demands because they have to stockpile it all, and normally these crushers are close to where the waste is generated. So it would be great if we could actually set up stockpiles where there will be future projects, and there is like an organization that actually coordinates, because the material can get almost for free. The recycled material you can almost get for free, but you need to know where the project will be, and you have to then somehow make sure that it meets the specs, and then just stockpile it, and when the project comes on, it's all going to happen. So there is some examples of soil banks like that in the world.